still in for now.
Just in case people are wondering, we're just letting people gather for the next few minutes. So we'll probably, we'll start introductions in about 3 minutes. If anyone needs to get a drink of water or anything like that. Okay, well, it's now 1:05, so we will get things rolling. So thanks everyone for coming. So my name is Ben Mortensen, and I'm an associate professor in occupational science, occupational therapy at UBC. And I have the lovely responsibility of moderating today's session. Basically, we're looking at exploring issues around the built environment in terms of accessibility for people with disabilities. And there's sort of two foci here. One is around looking at the home environment, and then the other is the much more broader, looking into the community. And I'm delighted to say that we have a number of an excellent panel of people in this area who people can ask questions of. So just in terms of how this will progress, basically we'll get everyone to introduce themselves very quickly within a minute. And then I'm going to start each sort of section by asking one question. And then we're going to throw it open to everyone else who's in attendance here. And there's several ways where you can ask questions. One is you can put questions in the chat box and we can read them off. The other option is to raise your hand and then we will unmute you and you can ask your question audibly if that's better, easier for you. And the other point I'd like to make is obviously people are here, out of their good graces. So, we want to try and be respectful in our communications and realize that, yes, there are probably some issues here, but we're trying to find some solutions here as well. So maybe that's just a little temperance idea there. And then just in case, obviously there's probably going to be more questions than we have time to answer. And people, our panelists, I think will be able to provide their contact information. So if you would like to ask them specifically about things that, happen during this session or, that you think of later on, that you'll be able to contact them. And I'm sure they'd be happy to try and answer your questions. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just get people to introduce themselves really quickly within a minute. And we'll start maybe with Heather.
Hi, I'm Heather McCain. I'm Executive Director and founder of Creating Accessible Neighborhoods, a nonprofit we founded in 2005. My own experiences with multiple types of disability, neurodivergence, inaccessibility, and ableism led me to become an advocate, speaker, educated, and activist. And I work to create equity, celebrate diversity, and educate about and implement accessibility. I'm also a CRIP doula, which is a disability justice term for someone who helps disabled people navigate our complex systems, build community, and provide resources and support.
Wow, thanks, Heather. I've never heard that term before, but it suits you to a T. So I love it. Maybe we could have Paul introduce himself.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome. I'm Paul Gauthier. I'm the Executive Director at the Individualized Funding Resource Center. And through this organization, we do a lot of supporting of individuals around individualized funding, specifically for the CECL program, also known as the Choices in Support for Independent Living. We also support individuals on CLBC that would like to be able to control their home support. We also run the Right Fit program, which is a partnership between the Disability Alliance BC, and we connect wheelchair users with housing providers to fill wheelchair accessible units. I also sit on the City of Vancouver's Disability Advisory Committee, and I'm the co-chair of the Housing Committee. So excited to be here today, and thanks for everyone to attend. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Paul. That's great. Dylan.
Hi, everyone. Dylan Passmore. So I'm a senior engineer at the City of Vancouver in a branch called the Transportation Design Branch. And I've been leading a number of inclusive design efforts, advancing our inclusive design practices at the city, and also a number of corridor projects at the city. Most recently, the Granville Bridge Connector project, still ongoing. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much. Karen, can you go next? Can people hear me all right? I'm holding the mic up now. Okay, I will go with that. So Karen.
I think they're muted.
So Karen, we can't hear you at this point. I saw you earlier.
Okay. Now, sorry. I tried to unmute, but it won't let me. But anyways, hi, my name is Karen Lay, and I'm the accessibility planner for the City of Vancouver. My role is to develop an overarching accessibility strategy for City of Vancouver. And I see many of you on the line who I know from previous work. So hi friends, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks so much, Karen. And obviously, last but not least, we have Brad.
I hope I'm not last but not least. Brad McConnell, Vice President of Access and Inclusion for the Hansen Foundation. I'm coming to you from beautiful downtown Pender Harbor on BC's West Coast. And I've been a professional access consultant for over 30 years now, most of it with my own firm, Canadian Barrier Free Design, working globally to create meaningful access to specializing in large buildings, terminals, and events like the Olympics. I joined the Rick Hansen Foundation 6 years ago to create the RHFAC, the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program, which is a rating system that creates common language and common methodology to measure real access on any given site across the commercial and retail scope. And I'm on the board of directors for Accessibility Standards Canada, so operating the standards arm of the Accessible Canada Act. Happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Brad. So, we have a powerhouse panel here, folks. This is great.
Sure.
So I'm going to pose the first question, then we'll throw it open to the audience. My first question is, how can we address the rising housing costs for people with disabilities in our province?
I'll go.
All right.
I don't work at the street level, the ground level of actually creating the housing for individuals or placing people in. I work more at a policy level. And one of the things that I've observed, just again at a high level, is there's an artificial increasing, housing prices are artificially increased when developments set aside 10 or maybe 20% of the project for accessibility. But what happens is, again, from a policy perspective, the builder considers that non-market housing. And so automatically what they do is they take that out of their inventory. They try to make the profit on 90% of the construction now, or maybe whatever it is, 80 or 90%. And what that does is it artificially increases the cost of all the other units. So by considering us non-market, it just infuriates me that we're considered non-market. We're already 24% of the population, and every one of us has at least one person in their lives, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, lover, caregiver, paid lover, somebody else in our lives that also benefits from a barrier-free environment, accessible environment. So we're really 40 to 50% of the population already. And by considering us non-market, they're doing two things. They're marginalizing us. My tongue doesn't work today. We're being marginalized. At the same time, the cost of housing is going up for no reason. So it's one of the things that just annoys me.
Thanks so much, Brad.
And if I could add something here, Brad, you make a very good point, and I think that those that are living on the front end side of things here, what really needs to happen around the housing cost is we need to have access to more rent supplements. Frankly, we need the dollars to be attached to the individual for those that cannot afford to be able to pay full rent. And when it's attached to the individual housing units, people with disabilities then are stuck to stay within that unit. So if we actually have rent supplements that are more available than they are, at the right fit, we have 10 housing supplements, and boy, has it made a difference for those 10 individuals. So this needs to be looked at. We need to continue to speak with government and to be able to talk this through. We're aware of a couple of co-ops out there right now that just don't have any rent, subsidy available within their unit. Fully accessible, wheelchair accessible, roll-in shower, the whole 9 yards. $1,600 rent, where many of us are on PWD and can only afford the $375. So there's a gap here. There's a real financial accessibility gap.
Huge.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because disability also has such a low amount for rent, and that amount within what people on disability get for housing really needs to be increased. It hasn't been increased in a really long time, and it's very unrealistic of the housing market currently. I think co-ops are a really important thing that needs to be more discussed, and unfortunately, because some are belong to cities, some belong to provincial, some are federal, it's a hard conversation to get going. But last year, they created a federal plan on how they were going to do subsidies, and they changed the subsidy system. And myself and my neighbor are on subsidy, and so we had this experience where most of the province was on a rent freeze because of the pandemic. Our rents went up by more than 40% because of this new program by the federal government. And we are both in positions where we could afford that increase as hard as it is, but we know that there are people who lost their housing over this. Now, first of all, you know, the fact that co-ops don't have the same rental protection as people who rent is a big issue, because if you were in a rental, your rent can't go up by, I think it's more than 5%. And so this 40% increase would never have been accepted. So I think that's something that needs to look at. Why are certain people getting that rental protection and others are not? I think another issue is, you know, to support what Paul was just saying, we need floating subsidies. We need subsidies that travel with the person to where they find an accessible unit or a housing that works for them, so that the subsidy is not attached to the actual unit, but it's attached to the person who needs it. I think that would increase the ability of people to say, when, you know, to use the example that Paul did of those units that are available, that are accessible, if the subsidy floated with the person, then they would then be able to get into those units.
Just makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. And it would be great to see these things indexed to inflation. I don't like how that's not the case, is mind-boggling. Does anyone else on the panel have some comments? I could read some of the comments from the chat, if that's all right, for a few secs.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
So Robin Bailey said, well, supply and demand. Create requirements to build accessible dwelling units for a broad spectrum of housing types. And Amy Jane Brown said that the same infuriates me, so policies need to change. And River Glen said, federal support failure, past provincial failure, and city forced to find revenue from taxes, so less likely to push low income. And then we have one from Amy Jane again, who says, yes, affordability.
Yeah.
That's affordability. Yes.
Great.
Yeah. I mean, there's just the affordability gap here, right? I mean, we do talk about the need for subsidies, but then there's the whole aspect of, you know, people with disabilities, even if you're able to buy a condo, or if you're, you know, fortunate enough to have employment to be able to do that, the amount that it costs to renovate is extremely high. And, you know, there's some amazing BC housing programs out there to support, but not everybody's eligible for those programs. And that's part that we need to be talking about as well, is being, you know, to be able to even the playing field here around being able to access. So, you know, I know that we've seen in the survey, you know, widths of doors, you know, having to convert, you know, tubs to roll-in showers. These are expensive items. And I know, Brad, when we start looking at the, you know, overall policies and stuff on building units and things, you know, if we could even have better structures so that it wouldn't cost so much to do these kind of renovations.
One of the things I really, really can't understand, it's been studied to death. We know for an absolute fact that at the design stage, it doesn't cost any more to do it properly, to create a universal space that's adaptable and anticipates the needs of the users going down the road. We know that. So why as a community are we accepting this? And certainly why are municipalities, this idea of 10% of a development has to be accessible, or even 20, it costs no more. access is not a design. Access is not a design question. Access is a management question. Management sets to decides how accessible everything will be. It doesn't cost anymore when you're designing it. It doesn't cost anymore when you're building it. We've got a number of studies. RHF just did another study on this. And to reach our gold level in our program, it might cost as much as 1% more than your budget. But to make a universal space for everyone is zero. So why as a community are we putting up with this 10 and 20% stuff when it should be 100%? Why are municipalities pretending that this is some kind of solution? Part of the problem is having enough stock that you don't have to pick and choose and find the accessible sites, and it all should be 100%. And we're partly to blame here because we're accepting this concept of 10% or 20% should be set aside. It doesn't cost any more. It doesn't. Do it right.
Brad, to add to that too, not to keep harping on rent supplements, but if you added the rent supplement, builders would be able to see the fact that it would be worthwhile for them to actually build these units that are even more fully accessible, actually, because if you did that, I'm sure builders would make those roll-in showers and things available for people with disabilities, because the people that are looking from the investment perspective would buy one of these. And once a person with a disability lives in one of these, we know they don't leave, they usually stay for a significant part of their lives. And I just want to say that, there's this amazing woman that works on my team. Her name is Jackie. She's been going out there and been, we do what we call a checklist. And, so many great intentions to make a unit accessible. They put in a roll-in shower, and then they have like a 3-4 inch lip on the roll-in shower. Where's the disconnect in regards to the tradespeople or the builders not making it a proper roll-in shower? Or again, making a kitchen fully accessible, but you actually can't get your wheelchair underneath, but they lowered everything, right? I mean, it's incredible the things that she's been able to find out. And we need to keep track of this housing stock, actually, and make it public so that, we know what is available across this province for people with disabilities to be able to access.
I think it's also,
Go ahead, Heather.
I think it's also important that we talk about the fact that housing is essential to people's mental and physical health. And this is something that's really important, is the province will save itself money when they, have adequate housing for people, because we have so many members whose mental health is made worse, who are set back because of the stress. Paul mentioned that there are, various programs that help, but unfortunately, first of all, you have to know they exist, and then you have to get through the process of applying for them. We need to remove some of the barriers to these programs. We need to be getting it out to the people who need to know about it. A lot of people, especially those who are new to disability, don't know where to go to get information. They don't know how to access this. And so this information really needs to be more readily available, and there needs to be support. Like the whole process last year with the federal change to the co-op subsidy program, there was no information. There was no plain language information. There was no people to support you. It was completely confused, and the document that supports it is in such government speak that even as, an advocate who's been doing this for over a decade, it was very difficult to understand all the details of the program. And I think that's something that we need to talk about too, is access to information, because it's very hard for people with disabilities to fight some of these decisions that are being made when that access to information to learn more and to understand the programs is so inaccessible to people.
Yeah, can I add on top of that, Heather? Because I think you've said a really important thing here, is access to information is one of the most challenging things that people with disabilities have. There's so many different programs out there. There really needs to be a one-stop shop, right? Where you can go through the front door, say exactly what you're looking for. I mean, we know it when it comes to home support, education, employment. There's so many different ways in But there's too many different ways. You know, we want to get on with our lives, get our home, and have the necessary funds available to do it. And I just want to add, you know, just one thing, and that is, you know, a lot of people think that people with disabilities are housed. And I really believe that we are in a situation where we have invisible homelessness. There are so many people with disabilities are living in a home that they can't access their bathroom. They can't access different parts of their home. And to me, that is still homelessness. And I think, you know, we need to be getting that message out there, that just because there's a roof over our head doesn't mean that we are properly housed.
That's a great point, Paul. To kind of build on that, we actually have a question from Robin, and she asked, are there municipalities that incentivize or require a percentage of accessible or adaptable units in new built multi-unit buildings?
Not that I know of as a blanket policy. It's one of the problems we've got as advocates, as community representatives. It's a game of whack-a-mole right now. You know, we hear about a new development, we all run over there and try to make it accessible. Then we hear, and we run over here, and instead of having a policy that addresses this, we're just chasing the whack-a-mole. And it just takes up so much time and so much resources, and we rediscover the wheel on every project, and it's just so annoying. It's one of the reasons we created the RHFAC, not to sound like a commercial, but to try to create that common language, common methodology, and an easy way to measure what's there. I think that the point was made earlier that we need a really good, reliable housing registry. And it needs to be populated, and people need to know what's actually out there, and developers and builders need to understand when they start to see that populated, they'll start to see that we are market housing, and they'll tell two friends and they'll tell two friends.
And I think it's also important that that registry is used, because one of the issues that is happening is we have units that are labeled as accessible, but have non-disabled people who have moved into them because, you know, the units were unable to find anyone with a disability, whether that's because they didn't look or whether it's because they genuinely couldn't find someone. But non-disabled people are moving into accessible units and taking out the accessibility. And so it needs to be understood that any accessibility that is taken out for a non-disabled person has to be replaced at their expense when it's about to switch, because I know from personal experience, having to move into my unit, the carpet was so thick my wheelchair wouldn't go over it. They had ripped out all the wiring for the plugs that were at the front of the counter. And so essentially they'd removed all this accessibility that I had to pay for at my cost, my grandpa's cost. And the thing is that not everyone has a grandpa. So not everyone has a money source that they can use in order to put that money there. And I have been in this unit for a very long time because I never want to go out into the market again. And that's the problem too, is that, you know, as Paul was saying, it's about, you know, just because you have housing doesn't mean that you have adequate housing, that you have accessible housing to you. And I think that's really important too, because when people do get an accessible unit, they hold on to it for a very long time. And it just shows that there isn't that turnover, which means that there's less of a market of available units. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. That's why we need more units as well. There's too long of a wait list for most of the units.
Yeah, Heather, unfortunately we've seen way too many times able-bodied individuals utilizing wheelchair accessible units, and there's such a shortage of accessible units that we can't lose any of them. Mm-hmm. We really cannot. And I'm so glad you said that, because it is a tragedy when that happens. Very frustrating.
That's why anything new has to be accessible.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge that, you know, it's a problem in Vancouver, but it's even worse in smaller communities where they may only have one unit or two units. I've talked to people who in their community, there were two accessible units, and in both units, the same people had been in it for 20 years. And it's great that they had housing that they needed, but it meant that all these other people who were disabled did not have housing that was appropriate. And I think we need to talk about that as well. Like the smaller communities need to have that availability as well. And I think Brad mentioned earlier that 24% of the population has a disability. Well, within the Indigenous communities, it's 30 to 35% have disabilities. And so also, you know, what's the accessibility of housing on reserves? What's the accessibility of housing in remote communities? Because a lot of people, unfortunately, aren't even able to go out into their community because of the lack of accessibility. And so this is a problem, but there's also that kind of additional barriers when you're in a smaller, a remote, or a community that's further away from Vancouver, and often that gets overlooked, but that geographical inaccessibility really needs to be addressed as well.
I also want to say that I think we've got to team up together. I mean, what a panel we have here, right? We've got Brad, we've got yourself, you know, Heather, and you know, we need, and in the room we've got Chris McBride in regards to spinal cord injury BC, and you know, we have Jackie, who is doing so much work around the right fit. We need to figure out how to team up on some of this, because I think we're stronger as a larger voice in this. And look at how many people have shown up today. 43 people I see currently on here. We need to be a voice and to be able to push forward with this. But I want to say also that when we come to the registry concept, you know, everybody's doing little bits, but I think it would be better if we kind of pooled together somehow, you know, utilizing the work that Jackie and the Right Fit and our team is doing, and working with, you know, Brad and others to say, look, you know, let's make sure we don't lose any more housing stock. We need to make sure that we know where they are, how they fit, and we understand, I think we all understand, that one person's accessibility is a different person's accessibility. So some units that may have a bathtub and maybe it does have smaller doors and stuff could work for some. That's why we need to understand them and know exactly what's out there, so that those with disabilities that are able to fit into those units are able to, right? And make that information available.
I think we also need to pressure the government to stop using the carrot and start using the hammer, because for too long there's been an expectation that you know, people will do this because it's what's good. That's not working. We need to have you know, legislation that has bite. We need to have actual laws and guidelines that are followed. And I think that's really important, is that you know, there has to be that might of having a document or something that really supports the work that is being done. And very much to your point, Paul, there, just about the education of what is accessibility, because yeah, there's some units that have visible alarms for people who are deaf, or the visual alarms. And so that is a unit that somebody who is not in a wheelchair could use. And so we need to understand what is accessibility, what is available, and have some sort of registry that has that, but also have that legislation to back it up. Because right now we already have rights that are being denied, and we need to have stronger legislation to support what we should be getting.
And, you know, Heather, thanks for talking about the legislation aspect. You know, I mean, it's great that we have a new accessibility legislation coming forward. But I think a lot of people with disabilities are concerned that it doesn't have the teeth it needs, right? And I think that you bringing that forward today, it goes into the housing side of things, it goes into home support. Where's the right for people to have access to home support, right? There is none, right? You know, it's a policy. And when you have a policy, it means that you can be denied. And when you can be denied access to housing or home support, this is a problem.
I'll just add one other thing to that train of thought. We do need better enforcement of whatever we get in place, and it needs to be it's significant. But any funds raised through that process, any fines levied, need to go into a research fund. It just circles back into creating accessible housing, or maybe co-ops or whatever. I'd hate to see any funds raised because of fines out of this just go off into general revenue, when really they need to come back to the community.
Very interesting, Brad. Yeah, you know, we see so many of those kind of dollars just going back into general revenue, and it needs to go into something that's going to move this forward.
I think so.
And to kind of build on what you guys are talking about with legislation and actually making a real change, Robin asked kind of a question about accessibility features and things that the industry thinks non-disabled people don't like. So how I would phrase that as a question for you guys is there a way to standardize what kind of accessibility features are added into accessible housing? Or does it have to be individualized, and does it make it harder or easier for action to occur because of that?
In my experience, homes are so personal. You know, I'm a C6 quadriplegic. There's no grab bars in my house. There's no grab, so I don't have a grab bar, and so it's really hard to do that. I think you got to go the other way. I think you have to create a space where the infrastructure anticipates the needs of the user, whether that's you need a grab bar today or 20 years from now, or you need a ceiling lift. You know, that having the infrastructure set, having the backing in the walls, the light switches are higher or lower rather, and the outlets are higher. All that stuff is looked after as part of the infrastructure, so that when it comes to me, I can move into any suite, I can make it my own. But what Heather was talking about earlier, we got to get the costs down of making the changes you need. It's something as simple as lowering a sink in the current practice means you got to tear out the millwork, tear out the wall, change the plumbing, and put it all back. But you don't have to. If it's designed properly, that can be a simple millwork thing by lowering the standpipes and things like that. The solutions are all there. The question isn't how to do it. The question is, why aren't you doing it?
Excellent. Well said, Brad.
Okay, thank you all for that. There are some more questions in the chat.
Cool.
I was having trouble because I was muted and I couldn't unmute myself. So
Can you bring your mic a little bit closer to your mouth?
oh
then?
yes. Yep, sorry about that. I was having, I couldn't unmute I had muted myself and then I couldn't unmute, so I was stuck. So now I'm just a little lost, but we're getting there. No, this is great. So thanks so much, everyone. Robin was asking about concerns about suites that are shrinking. And some municipalities are removing or lowering suite minimum size rules with an aim to improve affordability, and asking, does this mean that people using wheelchairs don't have maneuvering space in bathrooms and kitchens?
Yeah, this is becoming a major problem all around. Developers are trying to make more money, of course, and to do that, they need to shrink the square footage. We need to be looking at not just people that use manual wheelchairs, but people that use power wheelchairs as well. Because the turning radius for somebody who utilizes a power wheelchair is a lot larger. And I think we need to be having these discussions about what does it really mean to make a percentage of the building wheelchair accessible. And this discussion around square footage needs to be part of that. Builders are getting leniencies and things from the different cities and stuff. And I think maybe perhaps when we're making wheelchair accessible units, there needs to be some leniencies in regards to some of that square footage, just to allow for accommodating people with disabilities. And that may mean down to the end of the market pricing for disabled units may need to change for people with disabilities. And heck, we always have to prove that we have a disability over and over and over again. I'd be quite happy to prove that I have a disability if we could reduce the full market value condo to make it so that it is more affordable, because I need the square footage, not for luxury, but for the fact that I need it to be able to get around in it.
And I think we need to talk about, there's kind of a missed group here, which are people who do not currently use mobility devices, but know that they should. A lot of, we've heard from a lot of members who it took them like up to 3 to 5 years to talk themselves into using mobility devices because of the stigma and prejudice that was attached. They know they need accessible housing, but they don't feel they're disabled enough to apply for it. And so we need to work on that stigma as well, in, really talking about how there are people who don't currently need that accessibility, but need, to Brad's point, houses that are able to shape shift to their needs as those happen and as they become more comfortable. And I mean, I'm a person who has in my unit a power wheelchair, a walker, and a manual wheelchair. I once saw a 350 so-called accessible unit, 350 square feet accessible unit, and essentially my mobility devices and my bed would have taken up, like a good percentage of that. I'd essentially be hopping from mobility device to mobility device, and instead of being able to actually maneuver around with any of them. And so, yeah, that's something that we really need to look at. But I also think that we've got people who aren't yet in mobility devices who need places. And to Paul's point, that you often have to apply for things. Not only do you have to prove you have a disability, but you have the right disability or that you're disabled enough. And all these processes are really damaging to people and create internalized ableism that then put them off actually getting the assistive equipment that they need for quite a while.
Heather, I mean, on the disability enough, I mean, this is a huge problem. People know their situation. They know their situation is going to change over the next couple of years. We also know that it can take up to 5 years or a lot longer in many cases to actually get access to accessible, affordable housing. The housing registry, people are on there for many, many years. But you can't get on there if your disability is not at that point yet. So when you need it, you have to need it now, but you can't access it now. So we do need a way to be able to allow those individuals that know they're going to need access to that to be able to do that. Yeah.
And I think that's important for the older adult population as well, who a lot of them, because of stigma and prejudice, again, won't call themselves disabled, so they won't apply for disabled accommodations. And there's a lot of older adults that when they move should be moving into a place where they can age in place. And like we have had some members who are blind and they lived in a place and having to move is quite traumatic for them because they've learned their neighborhood, they've become comfortable with their environment. And when they have to move, it's not as simple as moving their home. They're changing the environment completely. They have to relearn an entire neighborhood. Whereas if they're able to stay in that unit, then they don't have to go through all of that, which can be quite traumatic for some people. And for others who have created a support system where they are leaving that home is more than just losing your housing, it's losing a support system as well.
And Heather, you brought up seniors, the elderly community is someone, again, I mean, this group here, we're mainly all people with, physical disabilities, seniors, at times don't recognize they have a disability until such time, of course, that they require significant support, right? But at the same time, I think we need to work together with the senior population as well that do recognize and, and again, as we're moving forward, either politically or from an advocacy perspective, we need to figure out where we see our common grounds on issues and try to move forward on those all together. Because I think, again, power in numbers.
Yeah, and I think connecting with families is good too, because anyone who's had a stroller wants a door that's wider, that wants a hallway where, they can actually let their kid out of the stroller and the kid can go past the stroller, not where the stroller takes up the entire entranceway. And so that's the thing. I think, accessibility is for so many more user groups than people with disabilities. And we need to utilize that power.
Yeah, and Heather, in front of my building, they put, I did a little Facebook video recently. I was so excited about someone actually took the initiative and put a ramp in front of our building down the curb, so I could go across to the park. What is so interesting is I've been watching outside my window, and the amount of people that are not people with physical disabilities that use it, that deliberately walk a little further to use that ramp, do use that ramp. It's incredible, right? So it is accessibility for all, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Kind of
That would be a great
to...
video. Sorry, I was going to say to Paul that would be a great video to see. I'll have to check out your Facebook or wherever social media you posted on.
Yeah, please do. And thank the City of Vancouver, actually, for for having it done. And again, that individual who called it in, I'm not sure who did it, but wow, it was incredible.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Angela.
No, you're good. Just to kind of maybe build on that experience, and for the others here, especially maybe the people from the City of Vancouver, if you could speak about, we kind of talked about making new places more accessible, but how do we go about that for places that already exist? So building the ramps for places that exist, or trying to turn apartments into more accessible. If you guys have anything to say on that kind of topic.
For sure. I mean, I deal more with the built environment, the street environment, and it's a challenge. Absolutely. It's just kind of the way a lot of street work happens around the city. When a big development comes in, especially if it's a rezoning, we have a lot of conditions that come with that. And so that's how a lot of, the street environment changes. And then those existing neighborhoods that maybe don't have the same kind of development activity, for zoning reasons, what have you, don't get the same attention that they deserve. So you've got, from a financing and budgeting perspective and policy perspective, like you've got to be really proactive about addressing those neighborhoods as well. And I think we're getting better at that now. I don't know specifically about the ramp that Paul you're mentioning, but we have been putting recently a lot more money into those kind of retrofitting efforts and really addressing, I'll be honest, like a backlog of curb ramps around the city, which is great. So we're working on that. But yeah, it's tough, and it needs more attention. And it also helps, when, talking earlier just about legislation and some movement there, provincially, that also helps us city staff, justify that kind of work as well, and, justify that when it comes time to figuring out our capital plan, so that's very helpful for us. Absolutely. So I don't know, Karen, if you wanted to add anything.
Oh yeah, that's good.
I think that was good, Dylan. I know doing the accessibility strategy, we've been talking to many different departments of the city, and they're doing great. There's always improvements that need to be done, and it's an ever ongoing work. And I know one of the big projects that Vancouver is going there is creating a Vancouver Plan, and we do have many engagements. And I would invite you all to be part of the engagement. We need more voices at the table that live with any kind of disability to be heard, and that's how change happens. So there's many engagement from the city, and I would just encourage you all to be a part of it.
Karen, can you just tell us what some of the strategies are for people who may not be that well versed?
So we do have, and the accessibility strategy is the overarching. We do have so many different departments doing their own sort of accessibility things. Like we've got Dylan doing the transportation 2040 with an accessibility lens is one perspective that the plan was written from. But the strategy kind of is an overarching vision that kind of puts all of the accessibility pieces that we've done as a city and trying to encourage all departments to have that unified accessibility lens into all areas of community. And we have 7 different areas that we are focusing the strategy on: built environment, information and communication, transportation, housing, governance, collaboration and capacity. And so the it's this and lens that we are encouraging both internal staff and the community at wide.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. That brings up a really good point that I didn't mention. I mean, it's such a big city, capital C city, with a lot of staff, a lot of different branches, departments. And every project I work on, it's a challenge sometimes. You've got so many different groups that sort of get plugged into these projects, and who's coordinating all that, and who's making sure this Telus vault, why is that in the sidewalk? Why couldn't it be out of the, and so bringing all these pieces together, really, we're getting better at it, but I think the efforts that Karen is talking about is just so helpful to bring sort of a coordinated lens to a lot of the work that goes on, sort of day-to-day work that goes on at the city. So important.
I think also there needs to be something in between Stratas and the human rights in order for people to fight for accessibility within their buildings. For example, I see that we have an example in the comments from River, who says, my building has 3 steps up to the front door. The Strata rejected the idea of a ramp for too little space, but if landscaping was reduced, one could be put in. And the problem is when the Strata has said no, the next level is the possibility of a human rights case, and we need something in between. We need something where people can go to provincially, say, where first of all the human rights is very inaccessible. There's a lot of people with disabilities who have not done cases because of how inaccessible the application is. And also there should be a way to deal with accessibility, especially when a lot of the stratas are non-disabled people who don't understand about accessibility, who don't understand the importance of it. And that's something that happens way too often to people with disabilities, is that our fate is decided by non-disabled people who don't understand the impact of that accessibility. And so I think it's really important that there be something, and this goes back to the provincial legislation, something with teeth that disabled people can use in order to have those rights actually recognized.
And Heather, can I add that, when people with disabilities are working with stratas to make something wheelchair accessible, there needs to be a fast track process within all the city programs, City of Vancouver, etc. I know myself, there was, when I purchased my unit, my condo, it had a 6-inch step to get into my front door. I'm sorry, this is not for cosmetic, fun-looking type thing. I actually cannot get into my unit unless we blow out that, step and flatten the area. But to actually do that, you actually have to go through a whole process of getting licenses done, getting the permits, and those kinds of things. And, and I understand the need for it, but there needs to be a fast track process to be able to have that happen.
That's great. Thank you so much, guys. Maybe just another question for Dylan and Karen. You've talked about a bunch of strategies to help people, but I'm curious, what is the strategy that you would tell this group would be most effective for them? Oops, sorry. What strategy would you recommend to be most effective for them in terms of advocating for changes?
I think one of the things is the more people within your building you can get on to work with you, as we were talking about earlier, accessibility is not just for one specific group, it's for many groups. So if you can get the parents of the building to talk about how the accessible doors would make it easier for them with strollers, if you can talk to anybody who does deliveries, that's one way we've gotten a lot of businesses to put in accessibility, is not for people with disabilities, but for those who are bringing in their products. Same thing for some buildings, for if you're doing any construction, having it for them. So looking outside of, people with disabilities, particularly because some buildings may only have one person with a evident disability. And so it looks like there aren't other people with disabilities, but getting families, older adults, delivery people all together to say how much the accessibility would help is one way to kind of pressure them to understand that it's not just one person's need, and it should be enough that it is one person's need. Unfortunately, it isn't. And so the more people you can get on your side, the better.
And again, I think the laws need to change so that it has to be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's frustrating, I think, to me that we, as people with disabilities, to live with as a person with disability, we seem to always having to fight for something, right? It would just be great to have proper legislation in place, proper bylaws in place. And this also has to include older buildings, a lot of the new bylaws and things are for new buildings, but we need to be looking at how to have older buildings also be responsible for making sure the entry in is accessible for everyone.
I think
you're right.
I think with speaking again from the transportation side of things, it depends. It depends on the thing, the issue. If it's a case of hey, this sidewalk I use often to get to the bus stop, it's missing a ramp, stuff like that. Actually, in Vancouver, we have the 311 service, Van Connect service. I actually use that myself. I'll report things through that service, and actually those requests tend to go directly to our city crews, and so it actually gets tracked and dealt with pretty efficiently. But for those bigger conversations, around larger projects or policies, practices, those kind of things, again, it sort of depends. And maybe Karen, I don't know if you want to comment a little bit about sort of the engagement strategy that's shaping up. But we try, especially on the bigger projects, to have a pretty wholesome engagement process where we solicit feedback from the public, but also we work a lot with stakeholder groups. And some of the groups, like the City of Vancouver, we have committees, formal committees that are set up. And so we work a lot with our seniors committee. And we also have a PDAC, a Person with Disabilities Advisory Committee, that we work with a ton on a lot of our projects. Those can also be, for the people, the volunteers on those committees, they know us well, and we know them well. We work together a lot. And, Rick Hansen Foundation, we reach out to a pretty broad set of stakeholders on all of these topics. So, through some of those committees or organizations as well, that could be a good avenue for channeling some of those thoughts. So it depends. I don't have, there's no one answer to that really. Yeah. I don't, Karen, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, thanks. As developing the accessibility strategy, we are right in the middle of the engagement process. We're doing we recommending 3 different phases, and this is only the phase 1 of the accessibility strategy, where we are doing 10 to 15 really targeted dialogue sessions to give input on the development of the draft strategy of the phase 1. And we hope that phase 1 of the accessibility strategy will be going to council by fall of this year in the hopes of recommending to council for the future phases, and the future phases include a broader engagement as well as a multi-year action plan for each department of City of Vancouver to implement, with the hopes of the final strategy going forth by spring of 2022. So it's a long process, but I would invite, we have a couple engagement, and I know at the end of this session, contact info will be going out. So I would invite anyone who wants to be part of the development of it to get in touch with me, and I can forward them the information as well.
That's awesome. Thanks, Karen. Sorry, I cut someone off.
No, I was just going to say, Dylan, you talked about the Persons with Disability Advisory Committee. I know in the City of Vancouver app, and it said on that committee, they are a dedicated crew, which is just incredible, that the input that they put back to staff, they listen to community. Laura and Peter, who are the co-chairs, are just an incredible leaders in that group. And if you have something that you want to put forward, you can always come to the committee. You can write to the committee, you can speak to one of us, and it would be looked at. And I think the developing of that relationship with city staff has been very good in the City of Vancouver. And I know that all across this province, there are a number of different disability type groups that represent the city, and there's working with the city. So it is a very good idea to tap into those groups. I also wanted to ask Dylan to tell us a little bit more about the 311. Actually, that was pretty exciting. So are you saying that you can just dial 311? Do you talk to someone and say, this is the corner that I'm at that has no curb ramp, and would love to see one? Is that how it works, Dylan? If you got any detail on that, or is it a leave a voice message kind of thing, or how does it work to mention what's not accessible?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's basically just a service. I'm not an expert, but it's a city service, and yeah, you dial, you can access it by just dialing 311, and you speak with a person, and submit your complaint or your congratulations, if that's and yeah, they basically,
yeah, that's great. I would love to congratulate on some stuff too, right?
and they triage that to the appropriate people, and some of them, depending on how the complaint is classified, if it's like, the paint has worn out this street corner, that's something that would just go straight to the city crew that handles painting. And so it's actually very efficient. I use an app on my phone called Van Connect. Kind of works the same, but I can basically just, sorry, this isn't a staff app. This is, a public app. And you basically just go in, and then you can just report, because it knows where you are. So you just say, okay, there's a problem here. And you would say what kind of problem it is. And you can submit a picture of it if you want, describe the issue, and then just click submit, and it goes off and gets triaged a little more kind of automatically. But yeah, they're actually pretty effective.
Thanks very much, Dylan. I just wanted to let everyone know and it's already happened naturally. We're going to spend the next hour talking about community accessibility, and it's already happened. So great work, everyone. You showed naturals. But I did want to call on Danielle because she, a while back, asked us to unmute her several times. So if we could get Danielle talking, that'd be great.
Yes, it's been so frustrating. Say, please unmute me, please unmute me. So anyway, yes. So my background is in architecture, And in the 1980s, I actually worked on a building project that happened to be in the United States, but it was for a seniors housing project. And we had ramps. There were low light switches. There were low within each unit, and it was and also the door handles were accessible. So it was totally accessible. It was meant for seniors and the disabled, and disabled seniors, of course, too. So basically, our building laws have to change, so that they will include this in any new building, and even if they have to retrofit it. And while I have the floor, so to speak, the Burrard Medical Center has no accessible washroom. Medical center, full of doctor's offices, no disabled washroom at all. And I think we have to really hit these people with where it hurts in the wallet. So I mean, it would just take, all those doctors to pull their lunch money, and they could easily convert the existing bathrooms into maybe every third floor into a disabled bathroom.
You're right.
Thanks, Danielle. That's great comments. And I'll let our panel riff on that.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly the truth. I mean, one of the things I do want to just flag here, though, is the solution isn't always. It reminds me of, you used to see a little sign in the lunchroom that said a little sketch, and it said the floggings will continue until morale improves. And one of the things that happens in the industry is we have these discussions and they're not part of it. We change codes, we increase penalties, we do all these things, but it's really important to include industry at the table. If we're going to use a hammer on them, we have to include them and make sure they're part of those discussions. And that's one of the things that's been left out quite a bit. And we've tried to address that at the foundation using the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification Program. But at the end of the day, it's quite correct. It needs to be a requirement, but the people who are actually doing it and the people actually paying for it have to be at the table, and they're just not right now.
So can you identify some of those people who should be at the table?
Oh, I think we go after the same way we work with organizations of and for people with disabilities. I think we work with the Royal Architect Institute of Canada. I think we work with, the BOMA Best Group. Some of the best success we've had is working right at the trades level and getting advice from carpenters and plumbers on the right way to do things. Even something as simple as designing a house so that you can install a variable height sink later was always thought to be a very expensive process. And we were talking to a couple of plumbers one day, and they said, no, you just bring the standpipes in at 12 inches instead of 17. You're still within code. You don't have to rip the wall out. You just have to put a flexi hose on the drain and you're done. And so it's that kind of real practical everyday solutions that we really need from the guys swinging the hammers, the guys putting the drywall. And if we can involve them, and instead of just coming to them later and saying, thou shalt.
Well, of course we can involve them. Matter of fact, that's exactly.
If they don't do it, once they're educated and once the hammer's in place, swing the hammer. I'm not against that at all. I just want to make sure that people recognize that up till now they haven't been part of the process, and Accessibility Standards Canada is working on involving them more, but just something to keep in mind. That's all.
Have you included the developers in?
Yeah, we've tried. I mean, that's the.
But that's with them. It's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's what I said earlier. Access is a management decision. It's not a design. Architects will build whatever you tell them to build. And so at the end of the day, we have to get that mandate from the owners and the operators, and they have to understand the real needs. So they have to be educated, they have to be involved, and they have to have a big hammer over their heads.
That's true. Ooh, that's true. Don't forget that hammer. How about involving the School of Architecture at UBC?
Absolutely, all of them.
And make it a project, make it like a student project. Okay, so you know, design thing.
Yeah, some really nice work on that going on at Carleton University in Ottawa and at Dalhousie on bringing that right into the design courses and the architectural courses.
Yes.
And so it's like pulling teeth. I think you're right. It should be a national program.
It should be. Yes.
Right now, it's just if we find someone who's enlightened, we luck out.
What I wonder what ministry that would come under.
It's probably Carla Quattro's, I would imagine.
Oh, I'm very good friends with Carla, actually.
I have a lot. I think she's amazing myself. So
she is.
Okay, thank you, Danielle, for your question. We're just going to move on.
Okay.
Yeah, we have just a couple down the pipeline that we need to get to, if that's okay. So thank you for your question. We had one from Robin that came beforehand, and it's kind of a little different of a topic, but she's asking on the topic of air quality and accessibility. So she said that air can contain contaminants, allergens, and triggers. And when people with environmental conditions live in multi-unit buildings, that can become an issue, especially if ventilation systems are unregulated. So if you guys have any thoughts on that, both in a home and housing sense, but also in a community environment.
I think this goes back to the registry we were talking about and having information like that readily available for people to understand, because yeah, we've got some members who have had to move multiple times because of the air quality or because of what is allowed, such as, there are units where smoking is still allowed on shared patios and things like that. And so knowing that in advance really helps save people time. Also, being able to check up on maintenance records is really important to be able to see that the building itself is maintaining what's necessary to keep that air quality going. I think there should also be some subsidized equipment for people who have environmental allergies, because we have, some members who are able to go out and buy air filters and things like that, and a lot who are not. And that should be seen as a medical equipment, because for some people it is the difference between them breathing freely and or not. So I think we need to look at it from a couple of different perspectives, but I think information is power, and knowing in advance what kind of air quality is there, and also having something where if other residents of that building disagree with what the registry says, to have a process in which people can actually make a complaint, because oftentimes something will say that it's accessible, but as for if that's really true or if it's checked up on a regular basis is something else. And so being able to have a process by which people can say, this building says that they have good air quality, but these are the issues that are happening. And I think that's a big thing, is that right now, a lot of the solutions are community-based, and it's people telling other people where is good, where it isn't, what landlords or landladies to stay away from. And so that's a big issue, is if we take that kind of expectation of labor and shared information off of disabled people and actually create something that is freely available.
Thanks, Heather. Angela, is there some more questions that you want to get to?
Yeah, so I'm just going to combine a couple questions from Maureen and Amy, which were both related to the idea of compulsory ramps within the city and within neighborhoods. So Maureen was talking about, is there a way to approach the city about making it compulsory to provide ramps? And Amy kind of adds on the idea of, if there was an emergency, how would that work with them either waiting to be rescued or hopefully to have a ramp to be able to rescue themselves? If you guys have any thoughts on how to approach the city about that, or the idea of ramps in general.
Oh, this is a huge problem. The building code works really hard at getting us into buildings, doesn't give a rat's butt about getting this out. So it's a big problem. I'll just flag that Accessibility Standards Canada has identified this as a primary pillar that has to be addressed right away. And it's engaged CSA and a number of other groups and forming a committee. If it isn't formed now, it's being formed soon. And I would encourage people to try to get on those committees, but it's being looked at that level. There's a number of different solutions currently out there just to try to mitigate it until there's some kind of real concerted effort. The big push that we're trying to achieve right now at the Accessibility Standards Canada is the idea of creating elevators so that they're all fire safe, so that you can use them in an emergency. Right now, you just can't. You know, you go there, there's a little plaque saying, in case of fire, use stairs. Where's the little plaque that tells me what to do? It's no little plaque for me. But if we could use fires in that, or elevators in fire conditions, that would be a game changer. And so there's people working diligently on that aspect of it. But there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of other ideas that need to be engaged.
On the aspect of elevators, I know that there's been a lot of people with disabilities really wanting to see that if there's a building that just not one elevator is in the building, that a second elevator needs to be part of it. So I just want to flag that out there because I've heard it so many times, and we need to start looking at changing the policy that if you're going to have an elevator, you got to have two of them to be able to when it breaks down. So,
and I'll just add to that. I just saw it's one of the comments, but not during a power failure. And so the other thing that's really important is that elevators and any power door that's on an exit route has to have emergency power. And what in our surveys, when our team goes in, that's one of the first questions they ask, and 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. I don't know how that's possible. It's on an exit route. But so, yeah, it's a great point. But this is all stuff that's covered under the fire code if they would just include us.
And we actually have a raised hand by Maureen. So let me unmute you, and you should be able to.
I was actually talking about something much, I mean, I think those are very important issues, obviously. But I was talking about simply, for instance, I go to a hairdresser on Fraser Drive, and there's one step, or maybe 6 inches, and she will not, the landlord will not provide any sort of temporary ramp or boards to help. I bring my own ramp every time because it's only 6 inches. It's very easy. And I'm thinking of Paul's omelette tree on Granville, South Granville is an example. They have one step, and as long as I can remember, I've lived here for 11 years, I can get in there because their staff are all trained. And when someone comes, you just let someone know inside that you're there. And they bring up just 2 boards. It's not a ramp, it's 2 boards that they know how to place. They know how to hold them. You could go up the ramp and have access. And when you're coming out, exactly the same. They're all trained. There's no staff member wanting how to do it. And it's just so simple and easy. And yet there's all these buildings that are using, I think it's some heritage clause or something, that they don't have to be accessible when it's so easily resolved. And that's is a day-to-day. There's shops. I live in the South Granville area, and there are all kinds of shops that I can't access per virtue of 1 or 2 steps. And I'd like to see that addressed and made it compulsory that they at least provide a little. You see them now with these outdoor, all the restaurants and everything are trying to make their, build their outdoor patios. And I've seen these little yellow plastic ramps that they put from the sidewalk down into their little fenced off areas. So it's not something that can't obviously easily be found. And that's my bugaboo. It's one of the little ones that comes up all the time.
Thanks, Maureen. Did anyone on the panel have any comments on Maureen's comment?
Brad.
I'm sorry, I seem to be dominating it, but yeah, of course it's needed. It's a big problem, but the solutions aren't as simple as they seem. And some of you may be familiar with Stopgap, an operation mostly back east run by Luke. I'm embarrassed, I can't remember his last name. And it was quite successful in the sense that he got a lot of buy-in from business, and it was just a little ramp, just over that one step, sometimes two. Problematically, he just got sued. Somebody who the ramp was down and somebody slipped on it and fell. And the lawsuit was successful. So Stopgap has been completely shut down. And so that little ramp solution, it brings with it some liabilities. And so it's not really that simple. I know it sounds that simple. I think it could be, it's a ways, there's hundreds of ways to address it, I'm sure. I haven't applied to that yet, but my cautionary tale is it's not as simple as just putting down a ramp, and Stopgap is the current, currently on the other end of the liability suit of that. And it breaks my heart because they were doing such great work and such needed work. But at the same time, you got to be careful when you find a solution, you're not really just transferring the problem to somebody else. And so creating a solution for a couple of wheelchair users created a bigger problem for a number of people with mobility impairments who walked up this ramp when they shouldn't have. So the solution might be to make sure, like you said earlier, staff to come out and understand that they can't leave it there. It's for this one-time use. But in Luke's case, the problem was the ramp was left in place and people fell. And so there's conflicts like this quite often. So finding a reliable way of resolving them is really important, and understanding, Dylan may have something to say of this, but the whole idea of the position that city's in, because they want it. It's not that they don't want to take out the staff. It's just that they don't want the liability as well. So it's a tricky little thing to navigate sometimes. It's sometimes not as easy as it looks. But I feel your pain.
Well, that helps, but not a lot, Brad.
No, I know, I get it.
Yeah. No, I think the fact, and it's unfortunate, I know when I had my accident, I wasn't going to sue anybody. It was my own fault, but the insurance companies insist that you at least try or see if there's any way the blame can be shifted. So I think it's too litigious, but again, that's out of our control. So thanks. I'll just carry on bringing my own ramp, I guess.
When I think to Ben's point, he replied or said that the fish counter has a ramp they can bring out, but you need to know to ask about it. And that's a big problem, is that there are quite a few restaurants and businesses who have ramps inside. So you either need to first of all, know that it exists, then you have to send somebody in who doesn't need the ramp to get in. So if you're out by yourself, it's not so accessible unless you're okay with asking random strangers to go into a store for you. And I think one thing that can be done is having that information available like at the front door, so that people know, hey, here's the phone number, call us, we'll come out with the ramp, or what is the process for getting it. Having that information on websites. That's a lot of the work that we do when we do accessibility audits, is saying, put this information on your website. Like, make sure that people know in advance, because most people with disabilities will be doing a lot of recon work prior to getting to your business. They will want to know that there are accessible routes and transportation and that they can access your business. And so don't just have something that is for access, actually advertise it and let it be known.
That's a good idea.
Mhm.
Thanks very much for that, Heather. I hope everyone can hear me better. I found some headsets. I stole some from my wife. So I think Danielle wanted to be unmuted, if I'm not mistaken. Is that true, Danielle?
We have a couple people though in line for raised hands.
So Angela, we'll let raised hands go first, but we did see you, Danielle, so we'll try and get to you.
You're on the list. We have you on the little list of who we unmuted. So don't worry, Danielle, we're getting to it. Next, we have Catherine asking a little bit about schools. I believe I just asked you to unmute.
Hi there. Thanks. Sorry, I came very late. I'm actually in an art gallery right now, so I might have to put my mask back on. I just want to get, there we go. My question, my comment, and my issue is that I have a 14-year-old son who is a both leg below the knee amputee. He wears prosthetics. He's very mobile. He has just started But there is always the possibility that he would, if his prosthetic legs broke, if he needed surgery, that he would be completely immobile. He has just started grade 8. He's finishing his first year in high school. And we chose the high school for him to go to because it was the right fit for him. He's in a mini school. He needs to be challenged. He's a bright kid. The problem that I have is that, or the issue that I'm facing, and it's a very large issue, is that that school is not accessible. It does not have an elevator, and it never has had one. It is almost 100 years old. It is a Vancouver School Board school. And I have been in discussion with the school board and various people ever since we applied for him to get into this school. And I'm just so deflated because this is such a big issue, and it is so important to have this school accessible, and all schools accessible, not only for my son, but for every child that wants to go to a school in their community, every parent that wants to access their child's school, and every staff member, every teacher, anybody that wants to get into that school. So my son right now is mobile, he's doing fine, but there is a high chance that he may need surgery. He and could potentially be in a wheelchair for 3 months during his high school career. This happened in grade 4, and he was completely immobile, completely non-weight bearing for 3 months. And when he was in grade 4, and I helped that school make it work for Mateo, and it did. Now, I have addressed this with the Vancouver School Board, and what their solution is if and when this happens, they're going to move his classes to the main floor. So it's a very reactive, very temporary solution. But what happens when tomorrow, if Mateo's legs break, literally the prosthetic legs break, or if he has a wound or whatever, he cannot access that school. He cannot get to his classes. It is a human right for education, and it is a human right for every child, anybody, to be able to access their school and receive education. So they feel like they have resolved the situation by, if and when he needs this, and if it's long-term, like he's in a wheelchair for say 3 months, they're going to move his classrooms to the main floor. But it's a very piecemeal solution, and I'm not happy with it. I feel very alone, although I do have 1 or 2 people that are really supporting me. I have gone to Inclusion BC. Anyways, I'm sorry, I'm going on, and I don't want to take everybody's time, but I just wanted to give you the background on this. I don't know what to do next. I'm thinking of filing a human rights complaint, but I was excited when I saw this forum, and I apologize for being late. I got to the museum where I could get Wi-Fi, and I thank you for listening to me.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I'm sorry you're having such a terrible time with us, and I totally empathize with your situation. I was curious if the panel had any suggestions for her.
We need accessibility for all. There's no doubt about it. And good for you to just, really put the pressure on. I think you need to continue to do that. The trouble you have, of course, is, the work that you're going to do, or what the pushing that you're going to do in regards to the school, is going to perhaps help down the road. I'm trying to think. I'm very much a person who is a realist and trying to figure out how to solve the problem now.
Yeah.
And that could be a problem, right, in regards to getting access right now.
I know. Yeah.
But I think it's really, really important that all schools are accessible. And frankly, those that are, I don't know if that school is going to be retired soon or not, or what's happening.
I've talked about the seismic upgrading. That's not going to happen for 10 to 15 years. And the reality is an elevator is going to cost $650,000 to $800,000. And when I first heard that amount, I was like, wow, but then how do you put a price on education? How do you put a price? I mean, there's always a price on everything, right? And I think the school board needs to make this a priority.
Well said.
Like, it's
Well,
such a huge, huge issue because he is not, like, right now he's accessing his education. Next week he may not be able to. Then what are they going to do?
yeah, and the reality is there's people with disabilities who need it now, and then there's people like myself, and I see Josh here and others that have children. We need to know that we're going to be able to access the school to be able to follow up with our children that may not have disabilities, you know, and it's not appropriate to tell us that we need to go to another school and get onto a bus that's going to be,
That's
you know,
right.
like
Without your without your community, without
Without-
your friends around you.
exactly.
Like,
And we want to grow up in our community and where we can support one another and get to know and develop our friendships and all those things. And as parents, right? It's important as parents to be able to do that. You as a parent need to be able to do that so that you can get that support as parents need with other parents.
I think I admire how hard you're fighting for yourself and for anyone else who needs that elevator, but you shouldn't have to. That's a whole problem.
Exactly.
Is that, you know, you shouldn't be having to fight. And I have seen so many parents who have spent their kids' entire high school time fighting for changes, and the toll that that takes on you mentally and emotionally and physically, because
and time,
the time, and the energy. I think this is the thing, like there should be a way, and this is not uncommon, unfortunately, in accessibility in school. So there should be a way to, you know, kind of to further our conversation from earlier in fast tracking these kind of claims, to understand how important that accessibility is, and to take some of that expectation of labor and energy and time off of parents and support systems backs and shoulders, because there's way too many people that are spending time that is very valuable on these issues that they kind of, to what you were saying, Catherine, they fix piecemeal to kind of appease the parent in the situation.
It's very temporary.
And then, you know, as soon as you leave, they probably won't continue to push for that accessibility. And the question too is, like, how many people could use an elevator where it currently isn't there and they don't have an evident disability, so they don't feel they can fight for it, is a whole other issue. There's a lot of people who are using stairs who really shouldn't be using stairs. And yet they don't feel that they have the right to ask for it because they don't have a mobility device. So those people are missing out as well. And so yeah, schools should have some sort of fast track for accessibility when they're excluding students, because you know, it just, and unfortunately what it comes down to is money, and disabled people lose out so many times to government and you know, schools and businesses who just don't want to put in that money. And to Brad's point earlier, you know, we really need to think about how many disabled people there are in the population, and really start having the systems to support the people who are fighting for this, and not have it completely on you know, the disabled person and their support systems.
Just one other real quick thing. I know I'm looking at the clock like everybody else, but on the elevator issue, we get this all the time. It's too expensive. You know, we can't drop $500,000 on but it's a red herring, because it's part of the building. They amortize that cost over the cost of the building. And in some cases that can be 80 years. Some cases it's 20 years. Don't tell me it's not a $650,000 one-time cost. It's not. And they want to hide behind that. Okay, but don't let them, because they're amortizing that cost. Nobody's laying out that bucks and putting it against your child for that year. Your child isn't causing that expense.
I know, exactly. And you
can't put up with it. I know it's hard.
But what do I do next? This is my question. And I don't want to take any more time, because I know there's a lot of other questions, but I'm not going to give up, but it's hard.
Estella in the chat says that she's like to connect with you, as she's gone through fights with school board in Calgary.
I'm just reading that.
Yeah, so that sounds like a good potential resource. And I don't know if you joined, but there was someone in the chat talking about making human rights complaints. And there was concerns it was hard, but then there was also a chat that it wasn't as hard as they had thought. So I don't know, we might be able to loop around to that later.
Okay, yeah, I've written the human rights complaint. I just need to submit it if I've done it right. I don't know. And I also don't know if that's like a really big thing. Like, you know, I'll fight forever for my son. I'm a strong person and I'm his primary advocate and I'll do anything for him, but I don't really know what human rights complaint filing that, if that's like really going for it or not. I don't really know what it means.
Does anyone want to give a quick feedback about the human rights complaint?
Yeah, I'm afraid.
Well, other than to say that, it's part of the overall movement, frankly, is the human rights complaint. I worry about the length of time it will take.
Months.
And it's not necessarily going. Again, I want something that's going to help your situation, but that's going to take a lot of time, but it will make a difference in the community of people with disabilities. People have to follow these kinds of things through if they can, and if they've got the energy to do it. Because if you win the human rights case, it does make a difference down the road. It usually just takes way too long, though.
Yeah. Okay. But it's a movement.
I think that's what we're seeing here today, which is great. Bruce, thanks for holding your hand up for so long. Can you give us your question there?
I'm gonna get him unmuted.
And you're muted at the moment.
Give me one sec. You should get a message.
Bruce, you're still muted. You have to reach and turn on your mute button if you can.
I can try and unmute him.
Here we are.
Hello. Yep, you got it.
Hello. We're Houston. I'm in touch with Houston.
You're coming through loud and clear, Bruce.
Thank you for this opportunity. And hello Dylan, hello Brad, and hello Paul. It's Bruce Gilmore here. Listening to Brad reminds me of something that was very meaningful to me a number of years ago, and something he talked about, and it was what does meaningful accessibility mean to me or Brad or Paul or any of our other people on the call, and that is meaningful accessibility was the connections between the places that we are at the moment. That's so a restaurant that's got an accessible door doesn't necessarily mean that it's a meaningful there's meaningful access there if the washroom hasn't in fact actually be kept in mind, or when the interior design of a place here in Vancouver resulted in the restaurant being converted from one brand to another brand, and they put in high tops. Mm-hmm. And nothing was wheelchair accessible. So just because the door is accessible doesn't mean the experience was accessible. So I just wanted to use that as my entry into this conversation. Brad, I'm as much addressing this conversation to you because of what you do with the Hansen Foundation. But when we talk about the BD group, the Polygon group, the developers around Vancouver, getting in and having the meetings with them, call it the developers who will be making their applications to do design, and the fact that they want to maximize their FSR, they don't want to change anything related to doing anything other than making sure the upside gives them accessibility to the market. Then there's the people that want to use it. What is the because this is a provincial issue. The Caribou, I know this factually, is going through a housing review. And it's predicated, among other things, and it's the aging people in the outlying areas now selling off little farms and wanting to come back into the place they have their connection to, Williams Lake, Cornell, 100 Mile House, and there's no inventory for them to move into. And the stuff that's going to get built out of the housing applications, among people that can afford to build these places, are following a provincial building criteria. Isn't that a very serious point of this conversation here today? And that's where is our relationships with the real estate arm of British Columbia and what they're hearing for people when people come to say, this is what I need because of my health, or what we'll call my abilities. How effective is this conversation and it's presented in a complete plenary way at, say, a UBCM annual general meeting, so that we can get the social case out to drive the hard agenda around that it is business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. The discussion earlier was about we are not non-market, and they insist that we are. And one of the things, as you kindly pointed out, that we spend a lot of time with the big players, the Concert Properties, the Aquilinis, and just trying to do that education about who they're really selling to. I have a condo in Burnaby, BC. It was built by, geez, I should know this. Oh, I heard an echo there. But anyway, the developer, one of the reasons we bought that was because my mother-in-law is 85 years old, and they happen to have a really nice little courtyard, about an acre in size, where you can take your dog out, walk it, but it's all fenced and it's secure. She's not walking in the neighborhood at night to take her dog out. So that's why we moved in there. And I mentioned it to the president of the company, what a great thing this was, and how your homes are really friendly to seniors. He was utterly shocked. He had no idea that was the ancillary benefit. So much of this is education. So much of this is disability awareness training. You know, like to have meaningful access, you need three things. You need to understand who you're actually building for, who you're designing for, and it's not just a few wheelchair guys off in the corner. We fight that all the time. The second thing you need is to change the design culture. The biggest barrier to people with disability is still the attitudinal barrier. And once we break through that, we've had great success breaking through that lately, by the way. And it's almost like the lights went on for a lot of developers and they just didn't realize it. And the third thing is you have to professionalize the delivery of accessible design. So having a reliable, trained, accepted people in the field, access consultants that are recognized as a professional add to the whole project. When we do a design criteria manual that is respected for what it is, you know, the consultant work that's gone into this, and it's not just written off as, oh, well, they're just advocates, or it's just for a few wheelchair guys. But the other problem we've got as a community, I think, is we tend to get lumped into one giant group. And so we're going to deal with sustainability issues. We're going to deal with urbanism. We're going to deal with all these things. And we're also going to deal with people with disabilities as if it's some kind of thing you can lay over the top like it's landscaping, not recognizing that we're part of all those other concerns. We're a piece of that. And so to segment us off and say, okay, we're going to deal with access issues once we get all this done, and we'll just look after everybody in one fell swoop. It's just, well, if ignorance is bliss, they must be very happy people. What can I say?
Okay, thanks so much. We should probably keep moving if that's all right. So Danielle, I know you've got that hand up and we're getting to you right now. So we'll try and unmute you, or you can unmute yourself, I hope.
There we go. Am I on? Yes, I'm on. Okay.
You're on.
So some advice for Catherine Pilizzari, I think her last name was, with the disabled son. And if the school is refusing to put in an elevator, a ramp, an outside ramp to allow her son to go into the school, maybe it's the second floor or something, is much easier and cheaper to build and does not take much money, and it would be so easy to solve that problem for her. And another thing is that I like to involve the companies that supply our elevators, so because they can always take it off as a PR expense or as a tax write-off. So if there is an elevator, which is like, for instance, you were talking about fireproof elevators or elevators in any kind of new structure, go to the Otis company, go to the big elevator companies and say, hey, this is a really good PR move on your part, and I must, and there was a and in turn back to ramps. I live near a restaurant called Go Fish. I'm very familiar, by the way, Brad, with Stopgap. And I talked to the owner of Go Fish, and I said, you know, you would increase your bottom line if you built a simple ramp just has to go up 4 inches from the pavement to their deck. And sure enough, they built this ramp, and it has increased their business many-fold, because not only does it allow us in wheelchairs up the ramp, but also, you know, women with baby carriages and strollers, and also to deliver their goods, like the cabbages for their coleslaw or the fish and so on and so forth. It makes it so easy. And it only costs a couple of dollars. They can use, you know, various building supplies. It takes, as you very well know from the guy that Stopgap, it just takes a couple of bucks to build a ramp, but it's makes such a difference, especially when they know that they can increase their bottom line. That's, you say you're going to make more money, and sure enough, they do. And there is also I covered the Paralympics in 2010, and there was a downhill skier who was Lauren Wollstonecroft, who was born with no legs and only one arm. And she won 5 gold medals, which was the most that any Paralympic skier won during the 2010 Winter Paralympics for Canada. And not only that, but Toyota used her in their advertising for the subsequent Winter Olympics in Russia, because Toyota had changed their policy, their advertising policy, to instead of just selling cars and trucks, they were selling movement, and so she was the perfect candidate for this, and they ran it all during the Winter Paralympics in Sochi, Russia.
Hey, Danielle, thank you so much. I love the idea of the carrot, not the stick, that you've been emphasizing. I was hoping to get to Estella, and then we'll just have to wrap up, because this is going to be the end. Okay. So Estella, we'll mute you now, if that's okay.
Okay, great. Hi. Yeah, I think the question earlier from Danielle was how can human rights and how to address the school board. And I think overall, the theme of today's conversation has been segmented efforts. And I think it was Paul who said it needs to be a collaborative effort. And to Catherine's point with school, I have to tell you, it's sometimes not about the solution that is available, and it's not about the money, it's about the will of the person making the decision point. And it is up to us to take a different approach. Sometimes the approach has to be more on, call it a business proposal, taking it at the angle where basically, you know, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. And if you do go through the route of human rights, it will take a long time. There's like 3 to 4 different levels that you have to go through in order to even get to the point of even going to the government Ministry of Education. So we've gone through all of these in multiple different scenarios, like I said, in elementary, as well as in high school now. And the approach that has worked twice for us One, just recently with the whole transportation accessibility, which was being taken away from the school, the kids, the special school buses being taken away from our children was a huge, I think major human rights. But we didn't go that route. We went directly with putting a parent group letter together and approaching it and addressing it to every single level of the government, every single level of the school board, and advocacy of and getting support. And when you do that with a consequence of, if this is not done by this date, because it has to be driven at a date time, this is what's going to happen next. And you have to be able to follow through with that statement, whatever you say. So, and typically social media right now is such a powerful tool for parents and anyone that can advocate or has to advocate. It's just, you need to make sure that you don't feel like you're fighting this alone. So that's why I'm saying, give me a shout. I mean, there's a lot of parents that are working together. I'm part of the Alberta Hansen Voice, group here. My daughter's hard of hearing, deaf, and I relate to your story because my son, who has peanut allergies, had an epileptic scenario, and he had to go to the hospital, and there was no ramp in his high school, junior high, and we literally had to carry him to the ambulance, and it was ridiculous. It was really ridiculous, and that prompted me to do a complete white paper on this, and basically told the school board, the trustee, the principal. I sat them down and basically said, here's a white paper for you. And these are the things that you need to do, and with a recommendation. And if it's not going to happen, this white paper is going to go public. And let me tell you, things were changed immediately. So sometimes it is about how the methodology of how we're going to address. And I think that's, you have to choose timing, like the method versus the timing. It sounds like timing right now is your constraint. That's you need to make it move fast. So, and the cost, lawyers, etc. That's just, you're going to end up having additional stress and additional, burden. Where in this scenario, as a collaborative, we can help you out. Okay. Just don't lose hope.
Thanks so much, Estella. It's very, what a great way to try to wrap up this session. But we do have maybe, Angela, do you want to throw out one more question from someone?
Yeah. The next question that we have is kind of a big one. So we'll get initial thoughts real quick, more on a transportation issue. So if Karen and Dylan can maybe talk on this as well, but the issue of not a lot of bus stops nearby, especially when trying to get to important necessities such as groceries, and also the concept of sidewalks and that not really being well taken care of. I think those are something that you two are very well versed in and could probably speak to.
And just in a minute, if that's okay.
Yeah, very quick thoughts.
Oh boy. And so maybe Angela, sorry, can you elaborate on the sidewalk piece?
Yeah, in our survey, we got a lot of responses of people saying that sidewalks were not well maintained, especially with weather and with a lot of construction not being advertised. So routes were detoured. So I think along those lines, probably for a minute.
Gotcha. Oh boy. Yes, those are all issues. Yeah, in terms of sidewalk maintenance, there's lots we could talk about there. Just a common thing we deal with is sidewalk heaving from tree roots. It's a constant struggle. We also have a really strong policy in Vancouver to be maintaining and expanding the tree canopy. And so we're always trying to we're really trying to find some creative ways to build our sidewalks that are a little more resilient to tree roots. This, yeah, I don't have enough time to really go into that one. And in terms of construction, yeah, we're also trying to get better. I think, you know, as far as cities go, we're not bad, you know, in terms of dealing with temporary, you know, pedestrian detouring around construction zones. I know we still have a lot of work to do there. I think it was Heather was just mentioning some points around information is key. I think also we have a lot of work to do to make that information more accessible, publicly accessible, not just around construction zones, but more generally to help people get around the city, to know, like for someone who is you know, is experiencing sight loss, to be able to know, okay, where can I find the traffic signals that, you know, have the chirp and cuckoo sound, or an accessible pedestrian signal, that kind of information. There's so much I could say about that. And transit, yeah, I mean, we just have a lot of back and forth with TransLink, because there's a push-pull there where, you know, they're trying really hard to keep transit services efficient, which sometimes, you know, we're getting pushed to remove some stops, and we need to bring to that discussion a lot of these types of considerations around accessibility and access to those nearby destinations. And, you know, if the stops are on a steep downhill grade, you know, we need to be thinking about that. And sometimes, you know, we meet somewhere in the middle, you know. And so again, I could talk for quite a while about that one, but
We're going to have to wrap it there, unfortunately, Dylan. Thanks so much. So I just want to wrap up by doing a few things. One is I just like to thank the panelists for their wonderful contributions, but also everyone who's attended and all their wonderful questions. And I'd like to encourage you to follow up with the panelists if there was a question that you didn't get answered, or a question came to mind that you've just thought of or even think of later. And I know the Disability Foundation is really excited to try and move some of your, you know, people did this survey and they have all the survey responses. So the Disability Foundation will be trying to push some of those ideas forward. And they'll also be sharing a transcript of this meeting with people who attended as well for your benefit. I just want to say, I think there were a couple of things that I thought came out that I thought were really wonderful. I love Dylan's idea of the 311. That was a new thing for some people here. So if you're in Vancouver, that's good. If you're outside of Vancouver, I'm sure you can contact city officials as well. And then I also like Karen's just the whole idea of trying to get involved in the consultations. So, you know, trying to find out how you can have your voices heard. But then I also really like just the idea that we're stronger together. So I think that came from Paul and Brad, you know, that, you know, we work together as people with disabilities, but also build a big tent, and bringing in older adults who may not think they're disabled, like Heather was saying, but they would still benefit from all the things that you're advocating for. So thanks once again. I don't know if I'm going to just let the folks from the Disability Foundation end if there's anything else they want to say.
Yeah, we just want to say thank you so much to our panelists and to everybody that attended. This was a really great, lively discussion. As we said, if there's things that you felt you missed in the chat, we are going to be sending out a transcript. And also this was streamed live to YouTube. So we'll make sure to send out the YouTube link again so you can watch it and share it with your friends. We do have a couple events coming up on our Connect Together platform in June, which I'm just going to post in the chat. And we actually have 3 of our panelists, Heather McCain and Brad and Paul, who are going to be speaking in the beginning of June on some of these events. So you can register. All the registration links are being put in the chat right now. And thank you so much to Ben for doing such a wonderful job moderating.
Thanks, Ben.
Oh, you're welcome. You guys made it easy. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a great long weekend. Stay safe, and thanks again.
You will.
We will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Karen. Thank you. So is that a wrap, Lauren?
I would say so, yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no worries. It's great having everyone here. So I have another meeting, so I've got to run to. But thanks for doing this. It was really fun.
And
Well,
thank you
that's-
so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Oh, you're welcome.
Fantastic
That's there's Emily. Now I see her again.
You know, I just
You were
staying
so good
quiet
at
monitoring the screen.
keeping things